welcome back to the show. Today we have a Q&A episode, so thank you to everybody who asked a question. I promise we are going to get back to some longer form solo episodes and guest episodes starting next week. I have Jordan Syatt coming on this weekend. Time of recording, this is the 29th, so maybe that's New Year's Day. I don't even know. But we're going to be talking about transitioning into fatherhood. Jordan and his wife just had a baby. And just, that's something Jenna and I are in the midst of discussing and something we're going to do in the near future. And I just find it a fascinating topic as far as how does your perspective on things change when that happens, or how has Jordan's perspective on things changed? So something I'm very excited to chat about with him. So that's will be coming, I don't know, some point next week. So stay tuned. So for today, we're going to go through, I always say I'm going to go through as many as I can in X amount of minutes, but that's just a lie. I'm going to go through all of them. I always look at the clock and I'm like, yeah, we can do a few more. I do have about 47 minutes here until I have a call, so we shall see. I always think about naming names. Do people like when their name is read out before the question? I feel like that's like nice to hey, so-and-so, this is your question. But then at the same time, are people less likely to ask if they know they're going to get called out? I don't know. So we're not going to ask. We're not going to name names for today. First question is thoughts on alternating moves instead of taking breaks to speed up the workout. So essentially what you're asking is thoughts on supersetting exercises. Supersetting is the terminology that you're referring to, which is like pairing exercises together to save time. Generally speaking, supersetting is a totally fine way to get very similar results, but save some time. But I recommend at least two things when you're thinking about supersetting. I recommend picking exercises that are non-impeding. People will mention like antagonist supersets, which means working antagonistic muscles. And so that might be something like a dumbbell press and a row, which are antagonistic movements, antagonistic muscle groups. But that's not so important. I think it's more important that if you're going to superset two things, that the effort that you put forth in the first one doesn't overly hinder the effort that you can put forth in the second one. And so what that means is that you want what's called non-impeding supersets. You want exercises that don't impede on one another. And more appropriately, the first exercise doesn't impede on your ability to do the second exercise really well. And so that can be antagonistic supersets. It can be a dumbbell press and a row, which are antagonistic. It can be a leg extension and a ham curl, which are antagonistic. But it doesn't have to be. It can be an upper body and a lower body. It can be a tricep push down and a walking lunge. It can be a lat pull down and a leg press. And so, non-impeding supersets would be what I would recommend if your goal is to save time. There are other strategies where you can do like same muscle group supersets. We could talk about that another time, but as far as saving time, we want non-impeding supersets. My second recommendation is to, again, because I'm not sure exactly how your answer, what you're envisioning in terms of alternating moves. I wouldn't just go back and forth forever. Wouldn't do like leg press to the lat pull down, back to the leg press, back to lat pull down without ever resting. So what you would traditionally do is like lat pull down, rest, lat pull down, rest, lat pull down, rest, then leg press, rest, leg press, rest, leg press, rest. I would recommend if you're going to superset them to do one and then the other and then rest. And so you're not going back and forth forever, never resting. You're just doing both of them once before resting instead of resting after every single one. So you'd like lat pull down, then leg press, then rest. Lat pull down, then leg press, then rest. And so you're still having that opportunity to rest for a bulk of time so that you can perform really well. If you go lat pull down, leg press, lat pull down, leg press, lat pull down, leg press, eventually this is going to be a cardio workout. Actually, not even eventually, that makes it sound like it would take a long time. Like by the second round of this, you're going to be huffing and puffing and sweating, and your performance will be limited more so by your endurance cardiometabolic factors, not the actual muscle's ability to produce force. Not locally, it will be more of a systemic fatigue issue. Cool. Next question. Would fewer moves, mostly compound, 3 times a week, lower push-pull work for hypertrophy? So your threshold is would X work for hypertrophy? And so not to nitpick, but like what does work for hypertrophy mean? Like, can you make gains training this way? Absolutely. Can you make gains training 3 days a week, lower push-pull? Absolutely, 100%. This discussion of, hey, I know I'm not training a ton of days per week, so how can I make the most of that is one of the big bases for my talk in March. We will be discussing how much should you train, the case for a minimalist approach. We are going to be discussing how to make more out of less time. And so what you kind of said was, hey, I know I'm only training 3 days a week, which by the way is enough to make gains. I know I put the word only there, but I think that it's more of a perception that 3 days isn't a lot. So you're saying, I'm going to do less exercises, but I'm going to keep it mostly compound. I think that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. Mostly compound. If you're not doing as much, let's pick exercises that give you a little bit more per exercise, which mostly compound lifts. Compound meaning, I don't love that terminology. It's not the most helpful, but like exercises that will work more than one muscle group at a time, let's say. I think that's a good idea. Hey, I'm doing less sets or I'm doing less exercises. Let me pick stuff that covers more bases. Totally agree with that. Other things you can do to make great gains is work closer to failure on average. Potentially superset, like I just talked about, potentially getting a little bit more volume in each day by supersetting without expanding the amount of time you have to be in the gym. Considering intensity techniques, choosing exercises that work the lengthen position, which most traditional, what people think of when they think of compound lifts, most traditional, I guess not most, but many traditional compound lifts do that, whether that's like RDLs or lower body pressing or upper body pressing tends to work more of the length position. I'd say upper body pulling is the one compound movement pattern that tends to be more short and overload. But working mostly compound, closer to failure, more length in position, considering intensity techniques like supersetting, drop sets, myo reps, stuff like that, can be a way that you can get really great gains out of generally less time. 3 days a week, lower push-pull can absolutely work really, really well. I would say that sounds like a bit more of an upper body biased program. I mean, you have 2 days of upper body, 1 day of lower body. So just take that into account. Like, does that actually reflect what you care about? And that's how you should be building your splits there. Next question, rounded back better on back extension for glutes? Oh my God, I love this question. I cracked myself up, man. So in my group program right now, we're doing hip extensions. We've done them before, but I'm seeing this sort of a question come up of like, hey, I'm feeling it here. What can I do to my technique? And so I realized that I really wanted to re-record a very thorough video, an exercise demonstration for the hip extension. But I don't own a hip extension in my home gym. And so I looked at Jen and I was like, shit, like I guess I'm going to have to come to the gym one day, maybe bring my mic, which I don't hate doing. The people at the gym are very nice. I don't love doing it, but I'll do it. And so I thought about it and it was like Saturday morning and I was like going to go with Jenna. Jenna goes to the gym on Saturdays. And I just looked at her and I was like, I just really don't want to go. I just really don't want to, like, it's just not something I wanted to do. Like, I'm just like cracking up that like the thought of like going to a gym. Listen, whatever. I don't want to get over it's mostly a funny thing where I was like, I looked up and I was like, you know what? Like, it would be nice to own a hip extension. And so instead of going to like be around other humans, I was like, I'll just buy a hip extension. So the hip extension came as of recording. I put it together last night and I'll be recording a video. In that video that will go in my group program, we will talk about this exact question. I'll answer it now. What your upper back does, listen to me very closely. What your upper back does has nothing to do with your glutes, technically speaking. You can perform a hip extension that will fuck your glutes up with a neutral spine from top to bottom. So neutral lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine, neutral all the way through there. You can perform a hip extension that will really, really work the glutes. However, what rounding the upper back, by the way, I want to be clear, rounding your upper back. I wouldn't actively round your lower back. Rounding your upper back, whether that's tucking the chin or encouraging what we would call thoracic flexion, flexing the upper spine, rounding the upper back, what that does is it makes it less likely that you will go into more lumbar extension. So it makes it less likely that you will use your lower back to raise your torso, to extend the hips too much. And so it's almost like less of a physiological thing, a little bit. You could say that a little bit of flexion in the upper back might turn off the erectors, might be something that people say. But more than anything, rounding your upper back encourages a range of motion that will be less likely to be dominated by the lower back. And so if somebody is doing a beautiful hip extension with a neutral spine, I'll just talk you through some of the scenarios. If someone's doing a beautiful hip extension with amazing technique, perfect neutral spine, head to coccyx here, we're talking beautiful neutral spine, and they are telling me, and they're not going up too high, everything checks out, looks beautiful, and they're saying, hey Jordan, I'm feeling this in my lower back a ton. We might try tucking the chin, rounding the upper back, and seeing if that helps. Personally, I've always found my ability to do this with a neutral spine has been fine, and I get a lot of hams and glutes, but there's a bit of an exploration here that you should be working on yourself. If you are feeling it a lot in your lower back, the first thing I would look at is range of motion. Are you going down too low? Are you coming up too high? Those are by far the number 1 and 2 things I would feel, or I would try if you're feeling your 45-degree hip extension in your lower back and not your glutes or your hamstrings, is am I going down too low to where my lower back is rounding? And am I coming up too high into into too much lumbar extension? You know, am I getting beyond the point at which my body is in a straight line at the top? And I know that you guys are listening. Some of you guys are on YouTube, but you're going to want your body to be in, let's say, a straight line at the top. We don't want the upper back we don't want your torso via contraction of the lower back to go up beyond that point. And so one of the ways to prevent that is to round your upper back. If you round your upper back, it's less possible for you to go into lumbar hyperextension. The net result of that is, for some people, it can help make the movement more glute dominant. I want to be clear. You don't need to do this to target your glutes. But if you are having trouble feeling it in your glutes and your hams, and you're feeling it all in your lower back, step 1, am I going down too low and am I rounding my lower back? Step 2, am I coming up too high and extending through through my lumbar spine, through my erectors too much? Number 3, let me try tucking my chin, rounding my upper back, and see if that helps. I would be less worried about the anatomical argument here, and I would be more worried about you exploring differences in your technique to figure out which of those works best for you for the goal that you have with that movement. Holy shit, we're 11 minutes in. I've done 3 of these. Next question. Lean build of 200 calories surplus on training days and maintenance on rest days. So let me just be, I'll be direct with this one here. So let's say you train 4 days a week and you're in a 200 calorie surplus. That's weekly. You're in an 800 calorie surplus. If you were in an 800 calorie surplus by going into a 113 calorie surplus, I think that works out to 113 calorie surplus 7 days a week, which would net out to like 791 calorie surplus by the end of the week. So basically the same thing. You will get exactly the same results. Can you extrapolate this to the extremes? What about if I'm at maintenance for 6 days and I'm in a 800 calorie surplus on 1 day? I actually think that it would, I want to think that it wouldn't be the same, but I really do think the results would be near identical. And so, you know, I think if you extrapolate this to the extreme, what if you were in, like to a real extreme? I know that sounded extreme, but what about a real extreme? What if you spend 6 days in a 200 calorie deficit, which would be a net 1,200, and then 1 day in a 2,000 calorie surplus, which would net out to an 800 calorie surplus across the week? Would that be the same? I don't think so. I think once you're spending time, like many days in a deficit during, like you want to spend as many days at least at maintenance, if not in a more anabolic state of being in a surplus. And so if we're comparing 200 calories on my workout days to 113 calories on every day, it's fucking the exact same results. I would even say both of those examples against an 800 calorie surplus on 1 day, maintenance calories on all the other days, you probably would need to extrapolate this across like many years to see a difference, if there would even be one. What I wouldn't recommend is if my goal is to build muscle and my goal is to be in a surplus, don't spend any days in a deficit, or spend as few days as possible in a deficit. That would be the one thing I would probably not do. Next question. Why do cable kickbacks give me hip flexor DOMs? The weight too heavy? If so, how to progress? Reps are already high. It's speculation a little bit. When you do a glute kickback, what you are doing is end range hip extension. And when you shorten one muscle, you lengthen the muscle on the other side. You lengthen the antagonist. And so when you use your glutes and a lot of those hip extensors to kick your leg back, what you are doing is you are lengthening your hip flexors. So think about this. When you are shortening a muscle on one side, what you are doing is lengthening the muscle on the other side. When you are doing a dumbbell row, let's say, right? Let's say you're doing a chest supported row and you pull your arms all the way behind the body. And I know you can't look because you're not on YouTube. Some of you guys are on YouTube. And let's say you're doing a dumbbell row and or a chest supported row and you pull your elbows all the way back behind the body. What you've done is you've shortened the muscles on your back. But if you were watching on YouTube, what this looks like is actually the lengthened position for the pec. The short position on a row, when you pull your arms all the way behind your back, looks like the bottom position of your dumbbell press, because when you shorten the muscles on the back, you're lengthening the muscles, the antagonist muscles, let's say, on the front there. It's like when you are doing a lying leg curl and you pause yourself at the top when your hamstrings are fully shortened. That's where your quads are fully lengthened or equally lengthened. And so one thing that comes to mind for me is that maybe your hip flexors have never actually experienced that much lengthening. Now, I would look at your technique and execution to make sure you're doing this right. I think that's like, it needs to be number one. It's like, okay, maybe there's a technique issue here. But that would be the number one thing that I would think is like maybe your hip flexors have never been this lengthened. I also think that I would look at what else you're doing that day, by the way, and I would look at the rest of your program, because maybe it's, part of me puts on my little skeptical hat, and I'm not so sure that it's so easy to decide that this is the thing that's giving you hip flexor DOMs. Imagine you were doing a split squat on this day as well, and you're doing a split squat, and then the next day your hip flexors are sore, and you're like, well, it was the glute kickbacks. Like, how do you know? Like, it could have been the split squats. And actually, in fact, split squats, good example, would be more likely to cause hip flexor DOMs because the hip flexors are actually working directly on the load. So I would be a little hesitant to try and like pinpoint exactly what exercise is giving that DOMs, but hopefully some of that helped. Gyro ball for help with forearm strength, having discomfort in my forearms. I gotta tell you, I don't know what a gyro ball is. I got my laptop in front of me here. Let me take a quick peek here. Gyro ball. The first thing that comes up in Google is gyro ball Pokemon. Gyro ball forearm workout. Let's take a peek here. Let's look at this images here. Yeah, I really don't think, if you're having discomfort in your forearms, I really don't think, like, it's extremely rare. Let me just, because I'm not really exactly sure about this exact scenario, but it's extremely rare that you need to be doing direct forearm work, ever. There's like really unique contexts in which you'd have to do that, whether you're a strongman, maybe this part from an athletic perspective, but for everyday people, you don't need to be doing direct forearm work. You need to be doing heavy pulls and just lifting to get strong enough forearms to live a functional life. It's not something that needs direct addressing. So my bet is that if you're having discomfort in your forearms, obviously you can see a qualified physical therapist, somebody that can talk you through this, but my bet is that like direct forearm work outside of unique circumstances probably isn't the answer. There's probably lower hanging fruit somewhere other than, hey, I'm having discomfort here. Let me directly work that thing harder. I'm not saying that that's impossible to be the answer or that it's impossible that that is the answer, but I would be a smidge skeptical that that is the route I would go down. Next question, wrist wraps for deadlifting, yes or no? Feels like legs could lift heavier but can't hold the weight. I'm gonna be we're gonna get in and out of this question in 2 seconds. Absolutely yes. Lift without straps. Listen to me, guys. It's funny because this is an amazing question to come after the forearm strength. Ow, I just kicked my leg into the desk. Lift without straps until you get to a point where your grip becomes the limiting factor. Let me be very clear. Your grip being the limiting factor is a waste of your time. The thing that is the limiting factor is the thing that gets the best stimulus. And so if you're doing a lat pull down or a deadlift and you have to put the bar down because your grip is giving out, then it is your grip that is getting the best stimulus. I don't know anybody who's doing deadlifts specifically, number one, first and foremost, to improve grip strength. It might be a byproduct, totally, it is a byproduct. Do all of your pulling movements without straps, without Versa grips, until you get to a point where you feel like this, where you feel like, hey, I could do more, but I can't hold it. Then go get Versa grips and never look back. Versa grips or lifting straps. Versa grips, I would say, are more expensive, a little easier to use, and last longer. But lifting straps are like $15. Versa grips are like $65. I have both. They both work great. It's not like lifting straps are crap. They're not. Once you get to a point where you feel like you could lift more, if it were not for your grip strength, go get Versa grips, go get straps. I do recommend the first year of your lifting career, probably not using them because developing some baseline of grip strength, probably a good idea. And you probably won't need to. You're probably just, no offense, you're probably just not strong enough to need that yet. So those are my recommendations. I'm a big advocate. I think Versa grips are great. Go on Amazon, type in lifting straps, and anything on Amazon will work totally fine. I have some by like Harbinger or some bullshit, but they're all the same. Next question. Any options in home bodies to have a bit more of a glute focus? Holy crap. I need to take a deep breath. The amount of glute volume in home bodies is fucking insane in my opinion. There is so much glute work. If you do my first advice, by the way, is to just take a peek at the optional exercises. So we have 2 slots that are optional. Both of them are options for additional glute volume. If you want more glute volume, do those. At the end of each upper body day, I give you an optional exercise. There's a block. It's the last block of the day. It's optional, and it will provide you 2 options. One of those options is more glute volume. But let me be totally blunt with you. I don't want to be a dick here. I literally just I love the question. I appreciate asking it. I know that starting a sentence with "I don't want to be a dick" makes you sound like a dick, but I mean this genuinely. There is a ton of glute volume in this program, especially if you're doing that extra glute volume that's in there. There's so much glute volume in here. It's crazy. I can't even fathom how people can do the extra glute volume that I provide in those optional slots. I can't even imagine doing that. So my advice to you, please start with an internal audit of, am I actually pushing myself in the work that I'm already doing? I promise you, there is not just sufficient glute volume, but probably an excess of glute volume in here. If you're training as hard as you should be training, if you're focused on progression week to week, if your technique is in check, if you're resting long enough between sets, if you're doing all the things that are laid out in the program, there is more. I believe with my whole heart, there is more than enough glute volume in here. So that I literally I'm staring at it right now. I'm sitting in front of my laptop, so I just pulled up the program just to make sure I'm coming at this from a fair perspective. There is more than enough glute volume in here. Yeah, there's more than enough glute volume in here. It's really, I know that our quad day has a quad dominant split squat and a heel elevated hex bar deadlift, but you get glutes in the quad dominant split squat. You get a lot of glute med actually. You get glutes in the heel elevated hex bar deadlift because we can only make that so quad dominant. It ends up being a very balanced split between quads and glutes. And we're doing glute bridge on our quad day. And then we have walking lunges as one of the optional exercises. We have lying leg abductions on the other day for a little glute minimus, glute med. The glute day itself is RDL, lunge, hip extension. I mean, that's a ton of glutes. Not that my experience is everyone's experience, doesn't. But if I do RDL, 3 sets of RDL, 3 sets of reverse lunge, 3 sets of hip extension, and I do them appropriately close to failure, my glutes are sore for, not the soreness is the be all end all. My point is that my glutes would be dying for a break. And then on the quad day, you're getting 3 sets of heavy glute bridges, 3 sets of deadlifts basically, which are a significant amount of glute volume. And then the following day, you can do walking lunges if you choose the optional glute volume, which is insane. So I would definitely recommend, if you want more glute volume, do the optional exercises, totally. But more than anything, do an internal audit, check on your form, check on your effort, make sure you're getting close to failure, make sure you're focused on progression, make sure you're really taking each rep of every set seriously. There is more than enough glute volume. And to kind of curtail this with something that might sound douchey is that if this is not enough sets for you to get a glute stimulus that feels sufficient, then your problem is not more sets. More sets will not get you there. If this doesn't get you there, more sets won't get you there. It is likely a quality of work issue, not a quantity of work issue. And I hope that that's mostly something that's encouraging, because you don't need more work than this. You need either better quality work or a shift in perspective in terms of expectation of results. Yeah, that's my general opinion though. I think this program, let me be very honest with you, I know that I have about 5% of the program is men, 95% of the program is women. We are very catering to the glute, back, and delt volume. There is plenty of that in there. Again, my opinion. Next question. A weight belt for PP PP women, is it necessary? I've researched. Got you, post-pregnancy women. I don't think, yeah, okay, so weight belt for, let's say, post-pregnancy women, is it necessary? I've researched. No. What are your thoughts? I've had 5 babies. Sorry, that was somebody trying to get all the words into the text box, which I respect. I don't think a weight belt is necessary ever outside of like competition circumstances. So let's just start with that. Never. The point of a weight belt is to reinforce your ability to create what's called intra-abdominal pressure. Intra, within, abdominal, abdomen, pressure. It's not there to save you and when, with bad technique. It's not there to keep your spine in a good place without you doing anything about it. It's there to reinforce stuff you should already be doing, which is creating an intra-abdominal pressure. Now, I would kind of say for hypertrophy's sake, for people who are interested in hypertrophy, you probably never need a belt, ever. I don't think you should ever need a belt because the kind of intra-abdominal pressure, so people have used the term bracing. The type of bracing that is required for things like powerlifting, you're just not going to be doing in hypertrophy because the main reason is because you're going to be doing more reps in hypertrophy. If you're doing a set of 10 RDLs, you're not doing a big Valsalva maneuver, breathe, brace, descend. You're not doing that on every rep. You'd pass out. You can't do that 10 times. And so the breathing techniques for hypertrophy, because the rep ranges are higher, are significantly different. They're different enough that the weight belt probably isn't super necessary. Now, just because the weight belt isn't super necessary doesn't mean there's a downside. The only downside of wearing a weight belt is if you are treating the weight belt like a safety valve, where you're just like, hey, I'm not going to worry about my technique because the belt will save me. That's the only real downside of the belt. And so if you want to wear a belt, that's great. Just make sure that everything else you're doing is still staying top notch, and that you're only wearing the belt for comfort or, again, for maybe like a reinforcement of some of that intra-abdominal pressure. But in a hypertrophy context, we really don't need to be wearing a weight belt because the benefit of wearing a weight belt is reinforcing this intra-abdominal pressure that you probably aren't doing in any grandiose way in hypertrophy because you're doing so many reps that's probably not something you're doing on every rep. I've worn a weight belt before on RDLs, but mostly during like really heavy, really low rep stuff. So in that like 4 to 6 rep range. So I would make a judgment call of like whether or not this helps me. And at the end of the day, like I would recommend if you're interested in wearing a belt, try it. Try wearing a belt. See how it goes. You might be like, wow, I feel amazing. My technique's amazing. I feel secure. That tactile feedback around my lower back and my spine and my abdomen feels good. I'm not, I'm still focused on my technique and my tempo and my execution. I'm not just like relying on the belt. That's great. That's awesome. It's like knee sleeves. Are knee sleeves super helpful? Not really. If you wear knee sleeves and you fucking love it, should you do it? Absolutely. I love wearing knee sleeves. Keeps my knees a little bit warm. A little bit of that compression feels nice. Is it actually doing a whole lot? Not really. But maybe it feels comfortable, and if it's something that, placebo affects you into feeling confident and good, that's awesome. Go ahead and do it. Oh boy, I'm fucked, man. We're 28 minutes in. I've done 10 questions, and there's like 40. Shit. All right, next question. Minimum sets, reps, muscle per week to see body comp results. I'm going to call your name out. Ingrid. Wonderful question. I'm going to be doing a whole talk on this exact topic. Is like, what is the least you can train and still make gains? And so I recommend either coming to Vegas for March 6th and 7th for the Real Coaches Conference, Real Coaches Summit, or paying for the web. You can buy whatever, I'll be speaking and you can buy the web archives, a recording of me doing that. What I would say is I'll attach in the description a podcast with me and my friend Brian Borstein, where we have an introduction to this minimalist discussion. What I will say, because I don't want to give away the goat here, is that even that's not a, what am I giving away something? I don't know. I don't want to give away the game, whatever. Is that it's less than you think if you do things like we talked about earlier with that 3 times per week discussion. If you train mostly in the lengthened position, compound lifts, close to failure, consider intensity techniques, sleep, eat enough protein, all that stuff. And so it is less than you think. And I really recommend, I really think that obviously I have an hour-long talk about this coming in March, and so I can't go into it right now. I'm not talking about, it's not fucking proprietary info. What I'm saying is I have a whole podcast on this and I recommend listening to it. The answer is it's less than you think. And if you are really interested in this topic, I know that you will love the discussion that I have with Brian, and even more the discussion that I end up having in March. And so I'm going to link that in the description. Please go listen to it. The answer is less than you think if you do some things well. Next question. Walking good cardio, yes or no? Some say it's just steps and some say it counts as cardio. Truthfully, I would stop differentiating between these two things. Steps, cardio, it's just movement. It's activity. Be active. Is there a difference between low intensity cardio and higher intensity cardio in terms of cardiovascular benefit? There's probably a difference, yeah. Getting your heart rate up occasionally through the week is probably a good idea. But you do that with lifting pretty well if you're I'm not saying it's the exact same as cardio. I'm not saying it's the exact same as higher intensity cardio, but I would stop differentiating between this. I think the differentiating between this is stopping people from going out for walks because they feel like it's useless. Be more active, get more steps, get out, go for a fucking walk. Going for a walk is the most underrated, underutilized, lowest hanging fruit in terms of health and mental and physical health benefits that exists on this planet. Stop differentiating between cardio and the first thing I would do is stop differentiating between steps and cardio. Cardio for most people is just an accumulation of steps. Get moving, get more active. Get 8 to 12,000 steps per day on average. If you have to do that by getting on a treadmill and going for a fast walk or an incline walk or even a jog or intervals, cool. If you can get that by moving more throughout the day, parking further from the target and then walking around more and going for a walk with the dog more, great. Do that. I really think the differentiating between the two does more harm than good. Doesn't mean that there might not be, with a closer look, a difference between the two. I think technically there might, if I'm being fair, I think technically there is a difference in terms of cardiovascular benefit between walking and something that gets your heart rate up more. There's probably a difference. But if you lift rigorously a couple times a week and you go for walks and you manage your nutrition and you don't eat too many calories and you eat enough micronutrients and fiber, I think you're going to be like in the pinnacle, in that 95th percentile of health. To get you the next step of the way, maybe you do some form of cardio that gets your heart rate up a little bit more. But 99 out of 100 circumstances, I don't want people differentiating between these two. People need to get moving. Go for a fucking walk. Whatever you can do to get moving, do it. Whatever you enjoy and can do sustainably, do it. And stop feeling, is this cardio or is this just steps? Motherfucker, it's movement and we need people to move more. And no, I did not just speed myself up to 2 times speed. That was just normal talking speed. So hopefully that helps. I think the differentiation between these two does more harm than good. Get moving in a way that you enjoy and can do, sustainably and consistently over the long term. Next question. When does the new meso start in January and is it okay for a 17-year-old boy in the gym? The next meso starts on January 16th. The program will actually launch the Friday before. January 16th is a Monday. The program goes live the Friday before. I do a Zoom call with my group where we go through everything in the new program, where we talk and break down what we're doing, why we're doing it, what stays the same, what's changing, and why. And I open that up for questions. It's a wonderful, wonderful time. So that would be the 13th, right? 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, yep. That will be that Friday beforehand. But yeah, the program officially will launch that Monday on the 16th. It is absolutely fine for a 17-year-old boy in the gym. The problems that plague a 17-year-old boy have nothing to do with like physiology. There's nothing that a 17-year-old boy can't do here. The problem with being 17 years old is mostly a practical like teenage issue of let me backtrack on that a little bit. There's nothing there's no person who's too young for this program or any program. There's no such thing as being too early to lift weights physiologically. There's no stunting of growth. In fact, there's only benefit to starting lifting earlier. The problem is people's mental capacity to follow a program. When I was a teenager, I was a stupid fucking kid. The idea that I would be able to follow along with a group, it was 20 years ago, and so who knows? But I don't think I could have handled that mentally. Kids today, a little bit different. They're more tech savvy. They're more understanding of how to work through apps and stuff like that, watch videos on their phone. And I have a bunch of people in my group doing the program with their kid. And so their kid is signed up as well. 15, I know for a fact there's at least one 15-year-old working out with mom, and they both are in the group and they're doing it together, or they're both kind of doing it, maybe not exactly at the same time, but they're doing it together. So at least this person has somebody with them, to kind of talk through it. But I'm highly available in the app. I answer every question. So if your son does join, please have him interact in the group, send some form videos. Anybody getting into lifting, form is the most important thing. Establishing good technique and motor patterns. early on in training will bode well for the long term. So send form videos. I will be there. I will help him. That would be super fun, by the way. I love the couple of like younger people in there. It's fantastic. It's really great to see. Next question. 17-year-old obese client. Would you suggest tracking macros to lose weight? Any downsides to that? This is a really loaded question. Physiologically, of course, there are no downsides to that. Physiologically. What you need to ask yourself is, what are the potential downsides to that in terms of relationship with food? You know, has this person, you know, do we have lower hanging fruit than calorie tracking? I think that a good podcast to listen to is my most recent one with What Are Your Macros, titled How to Track Your Nutrition Without Fucking Up Your Relationship with Food. So I would take into account some of the stuff we talk about in that podcast. There's no downside to tracking calories physiologically, but I would maybe just take a pit stop and see if there are any low-hanging fruits. Going for more walks, maybe gently shifting meal pattern, like establishing maybe a more balanced meal composition, teaching this person how to build more balanced meals, getting a protein and a plant on the plate. Are there lower hanging fruit? You know, not drinking as much alcohol. I know for 17-year-old, but some, you know, whatever kids do with these days, I don't know. You know, maybe trying to reduce, or, you know, I was gonna say trying to reduce some of the hyperpalatable food, but I would almost more focus on, instead of subtracting certain things, adding certain things. Can we get more fruits and vegetables? Can we get more protein? Can we get on a more regular eating pattern, right? Can we get rid of some of the grazing and the snacking habits, and can we get into a more consistent meal pattern? So I might look at some of those lower hanging fruit for a younger person and somebody who has a lot of weight, you know, a lot of extra body weight, let's say somebody who has obesity. I might look at least for some of those lower hanging fruit, just because I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with tracking. It just makes me I'm just a little bit more hesitant with a young person to jump into calorie tracking. I just would really want to know that person. Where are they from an intellectual standpoint, a maturity standpoint? I'm not attacking people like you're too immature to track calories. I just think that there's room to be just a little bit more cautious with the use of tracking calories at this age, where we might be able to get some lower hanging fruit and see some really nice benefits from actively increasing activity and looking at some non-tracking, just healthy habits that we can start to include or improve or be more consistent with. So hopefully that helps. Next question. If I hit 8 steps target daily, is there any added benefit to adding elliptical cycling as cardio? We kind of just answered this. There's probably a little bit of a benefit. There's like, if you lift weights rigorously 3 to 5 times a week and you walk, how much of the cardiovascular benefits are you getting? I'd say a very, very high percentage, but not all. There's probably a gap of benefit that's missing that is covered by higher intensity cardio. I think that's a fact. But I think you are getting a massive, massive percentage of that with lifting and walking being mega accessible. And so I do think those are the lowest hanging fruit most people should focus on. Next question. How would you realistically find your MEV and MAV? So MEV is minimum effective volume, which basically says what's the least amount of work that I can do and still make gains. And MAV, which is like maximum adaptive volume, which is like where is the amount of volume that I do where I get my best gains. Monica asked this. Monica, nice question. I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of people trying to be understanding that MEV and MAV exist is important, I guess. Not important. Important is overstated. Trying to nail this down for yourself takes a very long time. What I would say is look at general guidelines, which again, I would listen to the podcast with Brian Borstein. I would come to my talk in March. I would listen to the audio of that or the video. Get a general guideline, a general outline for what the industry and the research says is roughly where MEV, minimum effective volume, is essentially a minimalist approach. It's like how little can I do but still make gains? And I would look at the general guidelines for a range of volume that fits with a minimalist approach, where we see people still make notable gains with very little volume. And I would start with that. And then I would ask myself, am I progressing over the long term? Not in the short term, over 3 to 6 mesocycles. If I do this much volume, am I getting stronger in the hypertrophy rep range, in the hypertrophy, more hypertrophy-esque exercises over the long term, not the short term, the long term? 6 months, am I getting stronger? Do I PR meso to meso? Am I, not from day 1 to day 7, am I progressing? I'm not worried about that. I'm saying, pick, look at what the industry says, and that we look at the research is something I love talking about. Go listen to the podcast with Brian, come to the talk, listen to the audio, and start there. Look at what the research says and say, hey, X amount of volume, which seems to be low, seems to yield people pretty solid gains with very little volume, and start there. And ask yourself, am I progressing over the long term? Not the short term, but the long term. If you are, you're making gains. How to find your maximum adaptive volume? I'm a little less passionate about this because I'm way more passionate in people taking on a bit more of a minimalist approach, a bit more of a time efficient approach. I don't really love the maximum adaptive approach because that's in my opinion, the people who should be worried about that are bodybuilders, professional athletes. You can become insanely strong and jacked with a minimum effective volume approach. It might take a smidge longer, but you can get unbelievable results over a reasonable amount of time doing it that way. How would you find your maximum adaptive volume? You would incrementally increase volume over time until you get to a point where you're like, I'm not recovering between sessions. I'm not able to progress. I'm beyond the point of maximal return. If you look at a graph of if you Google graph of diminishing returns, at a certain point, there's a point of maximal return, and after that, we get negative returns. So basically, I would incrementally increase volume until you got to a point where you're like, I'm not progressing anymore because I'm not recovering. I don't actually recommend people actually go through that, to be honest with you, because I think 99.999% of people need to be more focused on being efficient in the gym, not, oh my God, how much can I do? I'm way less concerned with people being like, how much can I do and survive? And I'm way more interested in how little can I do and still make appreciable progress. But that's how you would do it. Next question, how much protein do you have now with each meal? Me personally, I try and get about 40 grams of protein with each meal. I eat 4 times per day. I think that we are looking, how can I answer this question in a helpful way? Me, 40 grams per meal. I know that if I do 40 grams per meal, that gets me to 160 grams for the day. I'm 195 pounds. That's more than enough for me. I think if you listen to the podcast of 5 things I've changed my mind about, I think protein requirements, are a little bit higher than they need to be. And so if I get 160 at 190 pounds, that's more than 0.8. And so that's way more than enough, in my opinion, that I need to get really nice gains. I think that number is probably in the 0.6 to 0.8 range where we see a notable drop off with more. And so I do about 40 grams per meal. Now there is a threshold for how much we want to get per meal to maximally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So there is I'm not just using 40 grams per meal because I need to get to 160, but that's primarily what I'm doing it for because I know that total daily protein is most important. But we also know that there's a per meal amount of protein that we want to get to fully stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So basically, we want to hit X amount of protein per meal to get the most muscle building benefits from that meal. And we see that number is probably roughly in oh man, I wish I had this in front of me. I think it's about 0.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if I'm 190 pounds, that puts me at roughly 80, let's do 80 kilograms. I'm 195 pounds, 88 kilograms. So if we do 88 divided by 0.5, so that's 44. I think 0.5 is actually me rounding up. I think anywhere from 0.3 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of protein per meal can be really nice. What does that boil down to? Do you need to be doing these calculations? Not really. If you're a smaller person, anywhere in that 25 to 35 at least per meal is great. If you're a slightly larger person, then maybe more in that 35 to 50 grams of protein per meal. But at the end of the day, total protein. Listen, guys, if you want protein intake in one sentence, eat at least 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight and split that up over at least 3 meals. If you do that, you are good to go. 0.7 grams or more per day, split roughly evenly over 3 meals, at least. You can have more meals. At least 3 meals, you're gonna be good to go. Next question. Holy crap, I thought we were gonna get through all these. I am sadly mistaken here. We'll see how I go. I'll see how many more I go. All right, next question. Some exercises in the program, I may not be able to increase weight or reps. Can I just keep if it's still challenging? In a nutshell, you should keep trying to progress. Every time you look at what you did last week, you should be trying to do a little bit more. if you keep trying to do a little bit more, but you can't, eventually you will. Like 99 out of 100 times, eventually you will. So 2 things I recommend you do. 1 is stay patient and keep trying to progress. Just because you didn't progress does not mean you didn't make gains. If someone's like, hey, Jordan, I only matched what I did last week on lateral raises, does that mean I didn't make any gains? Fuck no, of course you made gains if the training was hard. And that's why I say you should be trying to progress. Because if somebody says they tried to progress, what that means is they worked really hard. And to me, that is the threshold we need to make gains. It is not the progression that causes muscle growth. It is the trying hard. It is the getting close to failure. However, it is the pursuit of progression week to week that ensures you continue to train hard enough to make gains. That's a Jordan Lips original quote here. It is not the progression that causes muscle growth. It is the trying hard. But it is the pursuit of progression that ensures you continue to try hard. And so either, first of all, don't worry about it. As long as you're training really hard, that's what causes muscle growth. And as long as you're trying to progress, you eventually will. As long as the other recovery factors are permissive, you're getting enough sleep, eating enough calories, all that stuff. Cool. Next question. If you work out at different gyms, how do you track your progress when machines feel very different, right? 30 at one gym is not 30 at the other. That is a good point. That is when you can fall back on using RIR more consistently. So I'm not a big fan of using RIR every week. I'm a big fan of using RIR in week 1, closing the book on RIR, and just focusing on progression thereafter. Maybe layering on top of that the occasional specific failure set. But if you are training in different gyms, then it might be helpful to use RIR as a guideline. It's like, hey, I know that this is week 3. I know that I'm roughly going to be at a 210 RIR, and I'm going to rely on that. So the more you train at different gyms, the more of an understanding of RIR you should probably have. The more you train at the same gym, the more I want you to focus on just progressing. I guess if you train at different gyms, it's not just an understanding of RIR that you should probably have, but also just an understanding of training hard. Like, again, in the same breath as the last sentence, the last question, it's the training hard that grows muscle growth. So it will be harder to track progress if you're traveling and you're training at different gyms. We have people that travel all around the world, and those people are not going to lean as heavily on objective progression. Let's be totally clear. If you are traveling around the world all year round, you are not keeping as much of a logbook because the data is, not as useful, because what was, maybe you had kilograms, you're in Europe and you're back in the United States and you have pounds. And even if you're in your home gym and then this gym, or this LA Fitness to that LA Fitness, even if the gyms are identical, the weights might not be exactly the same. So I would fall back on training hard and maybe adopting hey, let me take the last set to failure so I know that I'm training hard mentality. And I might adopt using RIR on a weekly basis where it's like, hey, week 1 is a 3-2-1, the next week is a 2-1-0, the next week is a 1-0-0, maybe the last week is a 0-0-0, all sets to failure, and then be done and deload, etc. But to be honest with you, if it were me and I'm traveling quite a bit, I might adopt a last set to failure mentality, because that is what matters, is working hard. And I might let go a little bit of the objective tracking of everything because the data is a little bit yet less useful. It depends on, are you at 2 different gyms and you're consistently at those 2, or are you all over the place all the time? Next question. I've been doing 12, 10, 8 reps, going up in weight each set. Decent way to train or progress. Yeah, what you're doing is called a descending rep, right? Your reps are going down. Ascending load. The load is going up. So descending rep, ascending load. You are doing what's colloquially called a pyramid style, where you're going down in reps. It's a reverse pyramid, I guess. You're going down in reps, up in load. That's a fine way to progress. That's a fine way to train. And it is something, descending rep, ascending load, is something we use in my group, intermittently. We will do some descending rep, ascending load work. The downside of doing that is it's a little bit harder to be objective with your progression. If you do 12 reps at 100 pounds, then 10 reps at 110 pounds, 8 reps at 120 pounds. And next week, you have to, quote, do a little bit more, right? Because all forms of progression are going to be based around doing a little bit more than you did last week. It's a little bit convoluted. Do I go up on all the sets? Do I do now 12 reps at 105 pounds, 10 reps at 115 pounds, and 8 reps at 125 pounds? Do I go up on one of those? Do I go up on the last one? Do I go up on the first one? It's a little bit more complicated. And that's not to say that it's too complicated, because we do it in my group and I communicate to people that I want people to try and go up on all sets. And if they can't, try and go up on something. So that's usually how we'll discuss it. It's like, hey, try and go up on everything a tiny bit. But if you find that you can't go up on everything, just go up on something. So you might go up on the first set, match the other two. You might go, stay the same on the first two and try and beat your last set. Those are all fine forms of progression. It's just a little bit less straightforward. If you did 100 pounds for 12, 12, 12, instead, right? The alternative is doing the same weight for 3 sets across all sets. If you did 100 pounds for 12, 12, 12, let's say, and next week you have to go up, it's a little bit easier. Do you go 100 pounds and you try and add reps? You go to 13 reps on at least one set? Or do you just move to 105 pounds and, again, try and match reps? It's a little bit easier that way. This is just like you did one weight. So you've reduced the amount of variables that are changing. You did one weight for 12 reps. Instead of this weight for this reps, this weight for this reps, this weight for this reps, and now I need to do more than that. It feels like it's a little bit complicated. It's not too complicated. It can totally work. Just saying that is the downside, that you need to make sure that you have a progression model week to week that you understand, that you can apply, that has you progressing on things most weeks on most exercises. Next question. Can we go straight from a cut to a lean bulk, or is it important to reverse first for metabolism? Yeah, you can go straight from a cut to a bulk, basically with no downside. And when I say basically, what I mean is that when you are at the end of a cut, your metabolism is slightly reduced because you've been in a deficit. And so when you are calculating your surplus, so you said the word lean bulk, which I'm not picking on you at all. It's a term that bothers the hell out of me, because what you mean is a bulk with not too many extra calories. And that is what all bulks should be. Putting the word lean on it is just annoying. You're not annoying me with the question, but like, you've heard this term because it's been marketed to you in this way. When in reality, what is a lean bulk? A lean bulk is a bulk with not too many calories, not too many extra calories, so you don't gain too much extra fat. That's what all bulks should be. All bulks should be like that. Anything other than that is a bad idea. And so that's just it. That's what bulking should be. That we should normalize that as what bulking is. Anyway, whatever. So can you go from a cut straight into a small surplus? Let's use the term lean bulk and let's translate that to small surplus. Yes, you can. However, when you are at the end of a cut, your metabolism is temporarily suppressed because it has adapted downward during the deficit. So let's say at the end of the deficit, you're eating 1,600 calories. And let's say you've been at 1,600 and you have not been losing. And so you can reasonably say, hey, I'm maintaining at this new calorie range. So as of today, this might be my new maintenance, give or take. But if you put in a calorie calculator, hey, this is my weight, I want to be in a 200 calorie surplus, it might spit back out 2,200 calories. Because if you were in a weight maintenance phase, you wouldn't be currently under some of these metabolic adaptations. Your maintenance calories might be 2,000 and a 200 calorie surplus might be 2,200. And that might work really well. And so at a weight reduced state, at the end of a deficit, your maintenance calories are technically a little bit lower than where you could expect them to be over time. I know that that's a little complicated. I'm trying to simplify it. If you want to talk more about reverse dieting, go listen to the podcast that I did with Eric Trexler. It is a massively helpful discussion of reverse dieting. But the reason that it's helpful in this context is because it talks about metabolic adaptation. Long story short here, listen, if you're ending a deficit at 1,600 calories and you've been at 1,600 calories for long enough that this feels like your new maintenance at this, like you're not losing weight, then going to 2,200 calories is probably for a short period of time going to be more than a 200 calorie surplus. For a period of time while your body undoes those metabolic adaptations, it will be a larger surplus than you ideally want. So your question is, do I need to reverse diet first? No. You need to acknowledge that at least at this current moment, the day that you are increasing calories, at this moment, your maintenance calories are lower than what the calorie calculator you just said you just did says. So if you're eating 16, instead of doing the calorie calculator that tells you to go to 22, maybe you do 19 or 18. And for a short period of time, that will be a surplus. And maybe as your body just goes back to a weight neutral or a caloric or a neutral energy balance, it's a small surplus. But maybe after a short period of time, it becomes maintenance again. And then you need to increase calories again to create that surplus. So my advice to you is you don't need to wait to go into a surplus. Just assume that your calories are lower than what the calorie calculator says. So if you're like, hey, calorie calculator says a surplus for me is going to be 2,200, but right now I'm eating 1,600, that feels like a big jump. I wouldn't make that whole jump right away. I would accept that my weight is currently, my maintenance calories are slightly lower, my metabolism is slightly suppressed temporarily, and that if I want to go to a surplus, I don't need to go as high. You might eventually need to get to 2,200 because as you undo some of those temporary metabolic adaptations, you might need to increase calories to get yourself back into a surplus. So hope that helped a little bit. Obviously, you need a bit of a baseline understanding of metabolic adaptation to understand that. If you don't have it, if that was convoluted to you, complicated, and you want to learn more, please go, I'll link it in the description. It's a podcast with Eric Trexler from Stronger by Science where we talk about metabolic adaptation and reverse dieting. And we do talk about this context of going into a surplus. And so it's definitely something that I would build this into. Wow, this is, I thought I was going to get through more questions here. Okay. How many days you train your abs? Me personally, never. I never train my abs directly. You could do that if you wanted. But my goal for me is, there's going to be a lot of people, easy for you to say, totally fine. I understand that. I'm going to say it anyway, is that my goal for me is to have a functionally strong core. Like I want to have a strong enough core to go through my life. I mean, think about how simple that is. What do we want to be strong enough for? Life. That's me. I want to be strong enough for life. So I want my core to be strong enough for life, which I think 99% of people can do without direct ab training. That you will get enough indirect work doing strength training, resistance training, hypertrophy training, whatever. Maybe a small asterisk for pre-pregnancy ab training, pelvic floor work, after pregnancy ab work. I think that those can have some unique benefits specific to that context. If you want to see your abs, if you plan on actually getting lean enough to have very little body fat to see your abs, and you want them to look as amazing as possible, you should train your abs directly. Let's make no mistake about it. You're stepping on stage, you're doing a photo shoot, you want your abs to look as good as possible, you are planning on getting single-digit body fat, lean enough to see your abs, and you want them to look the best possible, train them directly. If you have no plans of getting lean enough to see your abs, then I would strongly consider, is this worth my time? Right? Aesthetically, you might not ever see the benefit if you don't plan on getting lean enough. Functionally, you might get enough of a benefit to meet functional life threshold of core strength without training it directly. And so it's essentially up to you if you want to do that. If you hear all of that, you're like, yeah, I can see my abs right now and I want them to look better. Okay, train them, absolutely. If you have no interest in getting that lean ever and your only goal was aesthetics, and you're like, hey, will training my abs make my core look better even when it has more body fat on it? It won't. If you're like, hey, I want to be more functionally strong in my core, I would first ask yourself, like, what evidence do I have in my life that you are not functionally strong enough in your core? Like, what has happened to you where you're like, yeah, that's my core strength. That needs to get better so that I can climb this mountain, or I can play with my kids more. I can, go for more hikes or whatever. I don't know if people actually experience those things. Again, context of pre and post pregnancy, I think is relevant. But outside of that, I'm not so sure. I just want people to make informed decisions. Is this worth your time? All right, we got to put a clip on this here. I'm going to answer 1, 2, 3 more, and then I'll answer the rest on Instagram. Cool. Okay, I'm going into a cut after a 7-month bulk. Better to continue with hypertrophy-based workout or switch to higher volume with more cardio built in? I will tell you right this second, this is not my opinion. This is only what you want. If you want, in your cut, to maintain all your muscle so that your body preferentially chooses body fat to burn off, to meet the calorie deficit, keep lifting for hypertrophy, right? I mean, if you want to lose fat and not muscle, keep lifting like you want to build muscle. Full stop, end of story. I don't want to nitpick what you mean by higher volume, but let's just talk about like the more cardio built in. You can do some cardio without worrying about, you know, killing your muscle gains. But I would not stop doing hypertrophy training. I would actually not change your training much at all. I would not change your training much at all. I would primarily create the deficit through nutrition, and I would make sure you're getting enough steps. That's what I would, I mean, that's like 99% of it. So I would not switch your training at all. If your goal is to maintain muscle and primarily lose fat, right? I mean, that's like, I don't want to say that that's what you should be doing, but I'm pretty close to saying that. I would make sure I would create most of that deficit through nutrition, train for hypertrophy to build muscle so you don't lose muscle, so you lose fat primarily, body fat. If you want to add some cardio on top of that as a means for achieving a certain step number that you give yourself a goal on average, I think that's a fine plan. Next question. I'm doing the lying leg curl. How should the leg position be? I keep slipping and mostly feel my calves. Would prefer the seated option, but my gym doesn't have. How should the leg position be? It's tough without like discussing this via a form video, but here's a couple of tips. The machine will have a pivot point about which the arm of the machine moves, right? So the machine has a pad. That pad goes, you know, like around your Achilles, and that part of the machine moves about a pivot point. I would fix the machine to fit your body so that the machine pivot point lines up with your knee joint. And so you can do that if you sit down in the machine, you get into the machine, you look down, and there you will see the pivot point on the machine. It's like, it'll be a circle, and you want that circle to line up roughly with your knee joint. That will make it the most comfortable. You want the pad to be roughly on your Achilles, and you want to make sure you're holding on to something and actively pulling on those handles a little bit. Will help engage the lats a little bit, stabilize the pelvis a little bit, and can help you feel it a little bit more in the hamstrings. As far as feeling in the calves are one of the primary knee flexors. They bend the knee, and they're mostly in charge with the first 15 degrees of knee flexion. So when your leg is straight, up to about 15 degrees of knee bending. And so your calves absolutely should be working. They are doing what they are biomechanically, anatomically designed to do. So there's nothing wrong with this. And me personally, I like to train the knee flexion as a function 100%. So I don't want you to reduce the range of motion so you never go down beyond those 15 degrees, so you never straighten out your leg. What I might do is what we would call slow on the gas pedal. Don't fling the weight out of the bottom. Pull it up slowly until you hit that about 15 degree mark, and then accelerate through the movement. If you explode out of the bottom, you will feel it more in your calves. If you pull the weight up slow, nice and control, and then accelerate through the movement, once you cross that, you know, roughly 15 degrees or like the first quarter of the movement, you might have a good chance of feeling it a little bit less in your calves. I honestly am not, like, I know that you want to build hamstrings, you're in this machine to build hamstrings, but if your calves are just getting fucking smoked, then I actually kind of am not so mad about that, because that to me signals that your calves are a weak point, and that as far as your knee flexor group of muscles, they seem to be a weak point. And so getting them stronger from a functional standpoint seems like a good idea. That would be, I'd have that sort of thing in the back of my mind. Okay, last question. In the group programming, if I want to do Peloton, better to do it the same day as leg days, better to do it on the same day or the day after legs. Got you. Well, we have two contexts of better. Better, like, will interfere less with hypertrophy. I don't think it's really going to make a big difference. I think I'm left with a feeling that you should be doing it when it's most convenient for you. I don't think if you do a Peloton twice per week, it's going to interfere with your hypertrophy in any notable way, in any organizable fashion. The one thing I would not do is do the Peloton right before you go train legs. So Peloton and then immediately go train legs. I would not do that. If you're not doing that, I really wouldn't worry about it too much. If it's a really intense Peloton, I would not do it the day before legs either. So if you have legs on Monday, upper body on Tuesday, then off on Wednesday, then legs on Thursday. So upper or lower body on Monday and Thursday. I would recommend Monday and Thursday. I would recommend not doing the Peloton on Wednesday. That's about it. And I wouldn't recommend doing it right before you do your leg session. All right, my camera's just telling me I have 1 minute left, which is convenient because that was the last question. Thank you all for listening. I will see you in the next one.